This week, I'm making a tall vase. The vase has a classical shape with a rounded form and a slightly narrower neck. I start by making a tall cylinder and then use some simple techniques to shape the vase. I'm also going to show you how to make a super useful sponge on a stick. So, let's get started. I'm using a little over 1.5 kilos of clay. So on average, plastic clay is approximately 20% water and then some organic material, perhaps 10%. And accounting for a little attrition when you're making and some trimming, my vase will end up being a bit under 1 kilo when fired. So clay also shrinks during firing. My clay has about a 12% shrinkage rate from wet to fired. So I'm just centering my clay here. I'm squeezing the clay up into a cylinder and pushing back down into a more squat cone shape. And now I'm just flattening down the top. Perfect. Now we're ready to push down and open up into the clay and making sure that I have enough clay at the base to trim a foot. So now I'm opening up straight across the bottom and compressing the base. So running my finger back and forth over the base. Now I'm ready to pull up the walls. As I mentioned earlier, I'm making a tall, narrow cylinder, and I want this to be structurally sound. By this, I mean I need a little more clay at the base, and I want the walls to become slightly thinner towards the top. I don't want them too thin because I want to be able to collar in when I'm making the neck. The extra clay at the base will provide support as you shape your pot. The slightly inward-leaning walls help keep your pot controlled as you create height. Now I can think about shaping my pot. Before I get any further, I really want to remove the water from the base of the pot. To do this, I need a sponge on a stick because I can't really get my hand easily into the pot. So I'm going to quickly make a sponge on a stick. I have a bamboo stick, I have a sponge, and some rubber bands. So I cut a piece of sponge and I make a hole in the sponge. I take a bamboo stick. You could also use an old paintbrush handle or even a chopstick, and I stick it into the sponge. Then I use an elastic band to wrap around the sponge and fasten it. And we're done. So back to the vase, and I can use my sponge and a stick to remove any excess water. And now I can continue to shape. Now I'm just starting to shape by pushing from the inside of the pot outwards. So this is called bellying out. Just pushing very gently. And I'm using a sponge to support the outside of the pot. I'm really taking my time here. I just start back at the bottom and slowly come up. I'm not thinning the walls at all. I'm just shaping now. And just a little collaring of the neck. So really, I just want to finesse the form a little more. I'm using a flexible rib on the outside. Just trying to get a graceful curve. And I'm working a little more on the neck now, just a bit more collaring, and I'm using my flexible rib to give the neck a little more definition. And finally, just giving the vase the curve that I really want. Okay, you really got to know when to stop. So just removing any excess water with my sponge, and I'm wiring my pot off the wheel. So the pot's dried to the hard stage, and I actually just want to work out how much clay there is in the base to trim my foot. So I'm going to measure. I'm using 2 rulers. One I place in the pot against the base of the pot, the other I place on top, and use my finger to mark. Now I transfer the inner ruler to the outer, and I can see how much space there is at the bottom. That's the clay remaining in the pot. So let's trim. Take my pot, and I'm using a Giffen grip. So I adjust the jiggers and we're good to go. A Giffen grip is really useful for trimming tall pots like this. It holds the pot upright, but if you don't have a Giffen grip, you can use clay lugs, or you could even make a chuck. I might show you how to do that in a further video. So I'm just trimming the base of the pot around the outer edge. I feel as if the clay's a little dry here, so I'm holding a sponge against the clay in one hand and the trimming tool in the other. The sponge dampens the clay a little as I trim. So I'm going to start on the foot ring. I've started by making a mark. So that's the inner edge of the foot ring. And I'm just trimming up to that point. So I start with the tool in the middle and trim out to the inner mark of the foot ring. I want to do this slowly, keeping in mind the amount of clay I have to trim my foot ring. An often asked question is, how do I know how much clay there is left in the base of the pot as I'm trimming? So you can kind of feel from the weight how thick the base might be. You can also tap, and you can kind of hear how hollow the pot is. But measuring is a little more certain. So if in doubt, take your foot off the wheel and take your pot off the wheel and check by measuring. I know it's a bit of a palaver, but it might save your pot. So now it's time to dry, fire, and glaze. And here's one I made earlier. I've glazed this one in a satin white with a deep green glaze around the neck. I hope you found this video useful. Remember to subscribe, it's much appreciated, and you won't miss out on any of my upcoming videos. Like and comment below, and as always, thanks for watching.